Hi, good morning again. So we're here now for how the strategic plan will transform the whole of the North's economy in a sustainable way. I'm going to introduce the speakers one by one, and then we're going to be having a panel afterwards. So our first speaker is going to be Jonathan Spruce, who is Interim Strategy Director for Transport of the North.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to brief, which those of you who know me over the last 2.5 years of preparing this plan know that that's quite unusual for me. We call this a transport plan. It is not a transport plan at all. It is generally a plan about economic opportunity. And one of the very first things that we did as a team when we set out to start the plan about 2.5 years ago was say that this plan has to talk to everybody in the north of England. Town and country, urban and rural, coast and urban area. It has to talk to everybody. And I think what we did with our strategic development corridor work and identifying those assets and clusters that you see in the plan, those sort of blob diagrams, is we took a very clear view that we had to understand what every part of the north of England brought to the economy of the north of England. And then our role was to understand what transport needs were to unleash it now and in the future, to give everybody in the north of England the greatest opportunity. The other thing I think we had to realise very quickly was the cultural, social and environmental assets of the north of England. So that this growth that we talk about, the 850,000 new jobs, the 100 billion to the economy, has to be inclusive. It has to be that everybody sees it. And one of the interesting things about the opening of the session was we picked a young child. We picked Gracie to try and show you how this plan has to talk to everybody across the north of England. Our great leaders across the north that sat here on Thursday are doing fantastic work locally with their sustainable growth agendas. We needed to bring this forward as well. And certainly Andy, who's going to be on the panel with me, and Judith, who was here this morning, have challenged us every step of the way about inclusivity and sustainability. Sarah and her work at IPPR North, that she'll talk about as well, also talks about the social aspects of what this does. And so it is really interesting that when we were developing the plan, and when we were developing the plan over the last sort of the 3 or 4 months and finalising it, we spoke less and less about transport. We talked more and more about opportunity. And if I can borrow maybe something Andy will say now, but he talked to the Huffington Post about 2 or 3 weeks ago and said, this isn't about journey times. This isn't about tarmac. This has to be about opportunities for the north of England. So what we presented to the board on Thursday and what we're trying to launch today is what we think is a sustainable and inclusive growth plan for the north of England that is based around transport, but has that opportunity, that unleashing the potential that every person now in the future of the north of England has to the full. Thank you.
And if I could now welcome Mayor Andy Burnham.
Thank you very much. It's great to see everybody here. We've not had a lot of reason, have we, to celebrate transport in the north of England in recent times. That's a bit of an understatement, but today feels like a genuine cause for celebration. Well, the fact we all made it here for a start off, actually. We all actually got to this prestigious venue on the northern transport system. But actually, seriously, to be here in one room, all of us, behind a credible plan that Jonathan and the team have delivered, is a massive step forward, as others have said, and we shouldn't underestimate how significant that is. You know, finally, one voice is going back down to Westminster and Whitehall, all of us saying the same thing, that now the north of England has to come to the front of the queue for transport investment, and it's a really important call, I think. It's powerful, it's undeniable, it seems to me, and it's great that you're all a part of it today. And I could make the economic case, the jobs case, the productivity case, but I go back to that point about our journeys here today. It just isn't good enough, is it, for people? If you think about the way people are trying to move around the north, the effect it's having on people's everyday lives. Let's be honest, it's a miserable lottery travelling in the north of England at times. You're either on a train that is kind of like a toss of a coin, whether or not it will get there on time. You know, you're stuck in a field somewhere and you know you've got to be somewhere else. That's a common experience. And because of that, too many people just don't try at all, and they go for the car. But then we know what motorway travel can be like across the north as well. Trains aren't good enough, as Dan Jarvis said earlier today. We've got the scandalous situation in Greater Manchester where less than half of our train stations are wheelchair accessible. What does that say? What statement is that in this day and age? You know, public transport's not open to some people, some members of the community. It's just frankly disgraceful. But all of that is before you get to the cost. And I think this is a really important consideration when it comes to this question of sustainability. So today, if you were to take a bus, a Metrolink and a train, if you were travelling across Greater Manchester, you would pay every time for each bit of your journey, and you could easily get into double figures. But that isn't the case in London. They have a cap on how much can be spent. I think it's currently around £9, daily cap. So why is that important? Because there isn't a strong enough economic case in the north of England to prioritise public transport over the road. So how are we ever going to have a sustainable transport system as long as that remains the case? We have to make public transport here much more accessible, reliable, and affordable. And we have to end, as I said, this lottery of going onto the transport system. People have to be able to trust in transport here. And we all need to work hard to make sure that that's the case. So the divide between London and the south east and the north, as we all know, as we've heard today, is massive. But why is it so great? You know, why, as the minister said, have all governments of all colours failed to invest in the north? Well, I can explain to you why, as a former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. The reason is Her Majesty's Treasury have always applied an economic test to whether or not they will approve transport investment. So which schemes are going to add most GVA to the economy? And the problem with that approach is it carries on giving more to more. So the areas with most activity carry on getting more and more money. They keep using up all of the pot, leaving nothing for anywhere else. And to break this, it does require a political commitment across all of the parties to say, no, hang on a minute, if we carry on in this way, we're just going to end up with this unbalanced economy as we've got. I commissioned a prosperity review in Greater Manchester with Sir Richard Lees to tie in with our local industrial strategy, and it reported on Friday. And it talked about this lack of balance in the UK economy. And it said that effectively it was like a plane flying on one engine. That was their words. And that is where we are, and where we always have been. We have one supercharged city, but every other English city not punching its weight on the national or international stage. And that frankly, cannot continue. So it can only change if we break that cycle of investment with more going to more, and that political case for investment in the north of England. You know, the Prime Minister is writing to the Leader of the Opposition today, saying that as part of the kind of consensus that might emerge after Brexit, is that communities that feel left behind might be prioritised for investment. Well, hopefully on your behalf, I can relay a message back to the Prime Minister and the government, and that is the entire north feels left behind when it comes to transport. All of us, not one community that voted leave versus another that voted remain. The entire north, I think, feels that we've been distinctly treated as second class when it comes to transport for as long as any of us can remember. So what better way of uniting the country coming out of this debate than to wholeheartedly back the plan that is being presented today, the case for Northern Powerhouse Rail. That seems to me to be the right thing for the government to do. And indeed, if we're going to achieve the ambition of carbon neutrality ahead of 2050, which is what we want to do in Greater Manchester, then you have to get on with this plan. You have to start making public transport much more attractive than travelling by the car. And really, we can't wait anymore. That action needs to happen right now. I just want to say one thing about this HS2 debate, which, as the Minister said, is in the media today. And it was encouraging from my point of view to hear what he had to say. I think we've got to have our eyes wide open to what's happening here. The North has always been forced to choose. Oh, you can't have that, but you might be able to have the other. You know, we've always been given this kind of like second best type approach. I would say be very, very wary of what's going on here. You know, this whole debate about the costs of HS2, we know what might happen, don't we? Where will be shortchanged if we allow the newspapers to run with this? It will be the north that gets second best. It will be here where the money starts to run out. Oh, you can't have that at Piccadilly, it's far too expensive. Oh no, you're going to have to pay for your station at the airport. That is what will happen, and it'll be the north that gets shortchanged again, and you can't let that happen. It's not a case of do we want north-south or east-west. We do need both if we want the north to have a connected economy in the 21st century. So don't accept second best on this. Don't fall into the trap of being asked to choose between the two. And let's not forget, of course, that HS2 puts in place a large part of the infrastructure that will deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail. These two things are intrinsically linked in my view, and it's important that we make the argument for both of them as the strategic case does, as well as saying we will not accept a situation where it's the north of England that suffers all the cost-cutting when it comes to scaling back the scheme. I won't accept second best at Manchester Piccadilly. In my view, that in the future will be the hub of the northern economy, the crossroads of the north. We want to see the same investment there as you would see at any station in London or the south. We don't want to be asked to accept a kind of second best compromise on behalf of the north. We think you build it once, you build it right, and then you get the benefits for the northern economy for the rest of this century, and that's what we need to be calling for. So I'll finish on this point to say that it has been a massive amount of work, as Judith Blake said. Transport for the North, I think, has done a brilliant job in bringing together all of the calls of people in the North in terms of what they need. It is investment, yes, but as others have said today, it's about the power too. The power for the North to determine its own future, but also to integrate these different modes of transport so that they operate as one coherent whole. It isn't the case today. It's a very fragmented system. And I know in my role that I'll only make Greater Manchester move in the way that it needs to if we can start to integrate tram, train, road, rail, and all of it with cycling and walking and give a modern transport system that truly promotes sustainability in the 21st century. So as Jonathan said, this actually isn't just a plan for transport. It isn't just a plan for opportunity, actually, Jonathan. It's a plan for health. It's a plan for the health of the people of the north of England in the 21st century. It's about giving them clean air to breathe, good facilities to use, to get about, improving their mental health by not always making transport a stress or a lottery when you set out on a journey. That's what we're all aiming for here, a plan for the health, prosperity and opportunity of the people of the north of England. Transport for the North have delivered it. It's time for everybody to get behind it and make this change happen. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Andy. Our next speaker is Sarah Longlens, who is the Director of IPPR North.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to come along here this morning to tell you a little bit about my thoughts on the Strategic Transport Plan and its link back to sustainability. We at IPPR North are delighted to see the publication of the STP. It's something that we have long called for. Ever since our publication in 2012, we've been calling for greater devolution of transport decision-making powers to the north of England, because we believe it's only through the devolution of local decision-making powers for transport that we can really, truly start to get to grips with the huge spatial inequalities facing the UK and particularly the north. So I'd just like to share 3 quick reflections with you on what we think are the real opportunities and challenges ahead with the STP. First of all, it's about realising our potential, as has already been said this morning. The STP for us is not a special pleading case for the North or a sob story about how terrible things are in the North, but it's a prospectus for our future. It's about helping the North fulfil its real potential. Because our northern economy is worth more than £300 billion. If it was an economy in its own right, it would be the 8th largest in the European Union, if we were still going to be in it in the longer term. If you compare it with Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's bigger than all three. So we are a real economic force to be reckoned with, but we need the opportunity to realise that in the longer term. So this isn't about transport as an end in itself, as has already been said, but the means to a better north for people and places. It's about 100 billion extra GVA, about 850,000 extra jobs. This is about a plan not just to build new transport connections, but to help fulfil our economic and human potential. And within that, a key part is about our skills and education, because that's something that we can do a lot to deal with, and it's something that will complement our transport investment as well. Because not only do we need to make sure that people in the north have the chance to have the best start in life through good education, but we also desperately need the engineers and the technicians to actually help build the future infrastructure for our transport network that is so desperately needed in the longer term. So I think in terms of potential, this is about marrying up the transport potential, the economic potential, and the human potential through our skills and education system. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about rebalancing, because the STP is an attempt to begin the process of rebalancing decades of underinvestment in our transport network in the north. And that was acknowledged this morning by the Minister. Because as our analysis at IPPR North has shown, the disparity in transport funding between London and the north has only continued to widen in the last decade. There's a gap of some £2,500 per head of population in terms of future transport spend between the north and London based on our analysis. So the STP for the first time means that the north is setting out its stall as to what is needed to help restore and rebuild transport infrastructure so that it is actually fit for the future. Because as a country, if we just keep investing in the same places over and over again, well, is it any wonder that those places become successful whilst other places don't have the same opportunity? So now is the time, through the STP, to help redress that balance and actually help to try and create a real opportunity and future for the people and the businesses who thrive here in the north. But that rebalancing is also about our natural assets, and that's something that we've done a lot of work on at IPPR North, about recognising that we also have to rebalance our policy and our ideas to make sure that we're taking care of the real riches that the north has in terms of our natural assets. So we're going to be building some of the best-looking transport systems in the UK in the next few years. That's a real opportunity to be at the cutting edge of the natural assets debate as well. How do we ensure that we create real net gain in planning in biodiversity through our planning system whilst we're building these new, really cutting-edge transport systems? So that's a real opportunity to integrate the North's great assets with the development of our great new transport system as well. And thirdly, it's about relationships, because that's been one of the real strengths of the STP. The fact that to agree and create the STP has required the North to speak with one voice, to forge new relationships, to collaborate, and to work together to try and hammer out this plan for the future. And the importance of that cross-northern working cannot be overstated, because this is about the North coming together to set out a vision for the future and a plan to make it happen. And that is something at IPPR North that we feel passionately about, that when the North stands together, we are stronger. And we've made the case for that many times in our work on our Great North Plan. And it's really fantastic to see it actually come to fruition today. So, whilst today is a key moment for the North, this is only the beginning. And of course, the plan still needs to go to central government for approval. For me, the real challenge is to connect the potential of this new investment with the people of the North, to ensure that the quality of the growth that this investment could create is inclusive rather than exclusive, that it not only helps to unlock investment and potential in people and places, but also in the future of the North of England. Because when we actually start to change people and places, then that's at the point we actually start to turn the dial on our long-term economic and social prospects. So thanks very much, and we look forward to working with Transport for the North in supporting this work in the longer term. Thank you.
And we can now welcome Kate Willard, who is the Director of Partnership Development for the Stobart Group. Thank you, Kate.
Morning, everybody. I'm Kate. I'm Stobart Group. It is Stobart, not Stobart. When you say that, people go, I know all about your business. I see your trucks all the time on the motorway every 4 minutes. You go to the moon and back, don't you, every day? Yes, we do, but I'm not Eddie Stobart. We sold that in 2015, so I am going to tell you a little bit about what we do so you understand the context from which I'm speaking. So Stobart Group is a FTSE 250 listed company. We are the UK's largest sourcer and supplier of biomass fuels, and we own and operate airports. We do ground handling. We have an airline, and you might have noticed we're just in the process of buying Flybe, so we do quite a lot of air stuff as well. I was given a brief for this morning, and I will promise to not go off-piste, although I probably will go off-piste, which was to talk about the 5 themes which were in this strategy around sustainable design, healthier, safer, inclusive communities and transport, environmentally friendly, green and blue, and the skilled labour market. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how our business has responded to these challenges and why this is such a fantastic strategy, which we all need to step up to the plate to and help deliver. So sustainable design, how is design sustainable? How do you make design sustainable? In part, that's got to be about future-proofing it, hasn't it? So that actually what you're designing has got a nod to the future, not a nod to the past. And that's everything to do with the materials you use and the way that you shape that building. But more importantly, it's about the people who will use it. So how do you future-proof something? An example from our business at London Southend Airport is that we use big data. And I'm going to be really interested to hear from Transport for the North increasingly how they're potentially using data around people and how people move and how people work and live to future-proof some of these designs. But another way of future-proofing design is also to think about the sorts of costs of design. And by costs, I don't mean cash costs, I mean energy costs. So we're having conversations at the moment, partly because we have got, even though we don't have them anymore, that logistics brain and we understand how to move stuff around. Talking to colleagues constructing the Lower Thames Crossing, which is going to be one of Europe's largest tunnelling projects over the next 20 years, to think about getting energy in there right at the beginning so that that construction project becomes self-supporting in terms of energy using construction waste to create energy. So beautiful circle there of waste into energy to support construction. Another thing I think we can do in terms of sustainable design. Healthier, safer, inclusive. That was a thing about how do we make this healthier. One person this morning said Cumbria, and it was actually the Secretary of State. I'm from Cumbria. Nobody ever mentions it. It's a nice place. But because I'm from Cumbria, I recognise and know this isn't just about cities. It is about rurality and it's about how we move. We're going to be opening later this spring Carlisle Lake District Airport to commercial flying again for the first time in over 25 years. It's been a 17-year project for me, so if you can see pain etched on my face, you can see pain etched on my face. But because it's in a rural location, surface access is quite complicated, and we've had to think about how we can make that airport accessible, bearing in mind the fact it's not in the middle of a city. And there was a piece in there in the strategy about making transport safer. And I think that we do need to think about the safety of vulnerable people, be they old people, young people, women. There's something about transport planning and vulnerability which I think is really important if people are going to properly use this and use it properly. Environmentally friendly, what do we do as an airport? Let's go right down to London Southend to make sure that we're environmentally friendly as an airport. So the first thing we did when we bought London Southend was we built a station. We are the only owned and operated, and in fact we built it, station on the network. That enables us to get people safely to our airport by rail. We use LED ground lighting. We collect rainwater, and all the toilets in the airport are used by clean rainwater. And we put solar panels there on the airport, so we provide 50% of our power by solar power at the airport. We've got a runway which takes modern planes which are quieter and more fuel efficient. We measure noise and air quality very carefully and report back on it. And also importantly, although we're in the London airport catchment, because London airspace is like this, it's a cone, and we're here, you don't get stacked. So there's less fuel being used by planes coming in and out as well. So there's lots you can do even around an airport to be environmentally friendly. Green and blue, that green and blue thing. There's a really nice green and blue thing, predominantly green, in our biomass division, who have teamed up with the Forestry Commission to look at biomass fuels. Biomass isn't great, is it? You know, there's a lot of pellets coming in from America, wood pellets to fuel that biomass. That doesn't feel very sustainable, does it? really. So we've teamed up with the Forestry Commission and we're doing a great project to bring undermanaged woodland back into active management and using that virgin timber as waste timber to fuel biomass plants. So using that green circular energy piece smarter. Two things just before I conclude. One is the fifth theme there, which is around skills. The skills piece is completely screwed in this country. It's broken, really badly broken. This is a personal view. We have a system whereby government gives skills providers, FE providers, shed loads of cash, and they turn out people for sectors and businesses which mostly do not hit our economic priorities in terms of growth. Invariably, and we had this at Stobart, the provision is crap, it's expensive, and it's not delivered in a way which works for our businesses. So in Stobart, we had a very simple solution. We wrote it ourselves. That's what we did, because it's not working. In my view, challenge Mayor Burnham, we need to do something dramatically different, and I think skills needs to be led by businesses. It needs to be commissioned by businesses, and I think the first place in this country that has the bravery to establish a skills commission which has got some balls, brackets, cash, which it then uses to commission skills, will do something extraordinary in terms of the skills that we need, not just to build this transport infrastructure, but to build the economy and build the jobs, which will move these people around in the jobs. But someone's got to put their hands in their pockets and find their balls and do that. The last thing I'm going to do before I finish is to actually come back to something that you were saying, which was about, it's quite competitive getting cash, isn't it, up north? Really competitive. But we do it because we say, do you know, we're gritty up here. Gritty, tough, gritty. And give us the money because we're gritty, right? I'm going to take you down to Essex for 20 minutes, all right? I do quite a lot of work down there because we've got London Southend Airport, which I've mentioned, UK's favourite airport. And down there, the local authorities are working together, which is a fabulous outbreak of common sense down there. All the South Essex local authorities are working together, and they commissioned some swanky consultants to do some piece around placemaking, whatever you know, place, la 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 la. So these consultants came back, and they said, okay, there's one thing that unifies these communities and this economy in South Essex, which is Thames Estuary. You know, it's Heseltine's old patch, that Thames Estuary. You know what they are? They're gritty. I said, hang on a minute. You can't be gritty. We're gritty up north. You can't be gritty down south. That doesn't wash. But then do you know what? I thought about some of the really rough housing around Tilbury where we work, and that's pretty gritty. I thought about some of the housing estates on Queensway going into Southend. They're very, very gritty. I thought about the women running the markets in the middle of Basildon. They're bloody gritty. And to be fair, the whole of Canvey Island's gritty. So the reality is, this is competitive. And it's not just competitive in terms of a kind of economic, academic argument that we can make. There's actually an emotional competition here. You know, the Thames Estuary's got its act together. It's got its act together. So this is a great plan. Transport for North are just a fabulous, fabulous organisation. And we all now need to be fabulous together to make it work.
Okay, if our speakers could join us on the panel, so if we could have Jonathan Spruce, Andy Burnham, Sarah Longlens and Kate Willard again, please.
Okay, this is a question to all of you. So why is the strategic transport plan so important to you personally and professionally? Who wants to go first?
Well, apart from the fact it's just taken the last 2.5 years of my life to develop it. I think that I moved up to the north of England in 1988 when I came to university. I'm from the West Midlands originally. And realistically, this is probably the first time I think that the North has spoken with that one voice, with clarity of purpose. And it's linked to the future there is a link to the past about underinvestment, but this is about a forward look about what the North can be. And for somebody who now has children growing up in the North of England, who has settled in the North of England, I just think that is the most important thing, both personally and professionally, is there is a plan and a singularity of voice and a singularity of purpose. And the politicians, do not underestimate the bravery of those politicians to sit in a room, red and blue, and say, this is it.
Okay, Andy?
Very similar, actually. I mean, I kind of came into politics, I guess, fired up by a sense of injustice about the way the North was treated, really. You know, I grew up, people know, born in Liverpool, which says something about the people of Manchester, that they elected me as their first mayor. But I'm very much of both cities, always have been. You know, born in one, grew up largely in the other. But I've kind of spent my life, you know, sort of in the Northwest. And you know, when we talk about the North-South divide, it is transport that always brings it home to you, I think. You know, when you, like I used to be, working in London, and you'd come back, and you'd be great to be home, but then you knew you were home when you were on a train that was trundling through somewhere. You know, it's that, for me, it matters personally to me, because it's always been the ultimate expression of the North-South divide to me. You know, the sense of two countries, you know, one that's treated very differently than the other. So, and then why does it matter sort of more professionally? Well, it matters just in terms of people's lives and opportunities, we were saying before. I'm going to come back to this central point. A single bus fare in Greater Manchester can cost a young person £4. In London, it's capped at £1.50. So young people often say to me, it's cheaper to get an Uber than it is for three of them or four of them to catch a bus. Now, as long as the economics of northern transport work like that, there's no way it will be sustainable, no way at all. And so therefore, you've got to do something about that. And it is about young people opening up opportunity to them, removing those barriers which the cost of transport puts in front of them. And that, for me, is about the kind of North that I've kind of spent all my political life campaigning for, a place where young people here have the same opportunity to get on in life as they do in other places. And if we're honest, that still isn't the case today.
Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, really very similar to what everyone else has said. I mean, I didn't grow up in the north of England. I grew up in Northern Ireland, so I'm always impressed when politicians manage to get around the table and come to an agreement. For me, that's quite an achievement. But on a more serious note, I guess we at IPPR North are delighted because it's something we've called for so long, and to see it actually happen is really great for us and really kind of helps to build that momentum, I think, for the North's future. And I think that the point about young people is absolutely right. We know from some of the work we've been doing with young people recently that transport is right at the top of their agenda. And there's that real sense of injustice, not only because of the North-South challenges that people experience and the disparities in funding and what people have to pay, but also within the North, that sense that if you live in the middle of Cumbria or in the middle of Northumberland, it's much more difficult to access the same services as someone in a larger city or town. So I think really helping to get to grips with that and putting forward that plan for the future is just so important for the North going forward.
Okay, and Kate?
Yeah, it's just, as a business, one of our kind of key foundation stones of our strategy is to take a long-term view, whether that's realizing an asset, developing a new business or a new division. And this strategic plan gives us the opportunity to plan strategically within a strategic framework which is agreed by everybody. So the timeframes really work for us as a business.
So what about, and I'm going to add something into this question actually, so do you think a transformed North will be able to retain the best people, particularly graduates, and do you think it will help to boost apprenticeships?
I think that's the test, actually. You know, I was talking about my upbringing. I went from university back home and tried to get a job in Greater Manchester when I graduated in the early 90s and couldn't, and in the end had to concede my defeat and move to London. And I'm afraid that is still the case for a lot of young people growing up in the North. If you want to get on in life, it's felt that you have to move away to do it. And we'll only be what we want to be, in my view, when that doesn't have to happen anymore, where there's the jobs in cities like this, in Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, that are jobs where you can feel you can fulfill all of your potential. And you don't have to move away from the North of England to succeed. And so for me, that is actually the test of it. And I think we're beginning to change that in Manchester now. I think with Media City and other things that have come in the last 20 years, I think there are more opportunities now to do that. But as long as it's perceived that you have to leave the north, you know, then we'll never be what we want to be here. We've got to keep our best talent. And yeah, without the transport system, we're not going to be able to do that. The other thing I would just say, you know, about that whole question of north-south, if you're a young person growing up here or Leeds or Manchester, and you get a job interview in London, if you've conceded that you might have, you know, the cost of that train ticket to London can actually be the difference about whether you could go to that interview or not go to that interview. And it's these kind of unfairnesses and injustices that are still there. And, you know, the country's got it. My hope is, you know, when we come through this divisive debate on Brexit, I was just saying before, the biggest thing any government could do would be to back this plan, Jonathan's plan, 100%, because that would begin, in my view, to answer some of what people were saying at that referendum. You know, this place looks after some parts of the country more than it does others. That's one of the messages I think that was coming through that referendum. And so for any government who wants to kind of build a sense of one nation, they should get 100% behind this plan.
I think also as well, you've got, you know, attracting skills to the north. But, you know, let's just say in like 10, 15 years' time when we've got all of the transport links that we want and need, do you think that we will lose skills and talent to the south?
I think there's something about brand here, and I don't mean that to sound vacuous, but brands and how people see things are very important and very compelling. So you hear a lot of people who say, oh, yeah, my daughter's moving up there because they couldn't afford to do that in London. So people are still coming for, well, it's cheaper up there, rather than, have you heard what's happening in Manchester? So I think there's something about turning the north into a compelling brand, and I think that we can do that as a city, as a standalone piece about how amazing our cities are, and obviously the rural areas as well, that we start to talk about them so that they start to become somewhere where people want to be. They become compelling places rather than we're going next, it's a little bit cheaper. So I think it's how we talk about them all.
Good point, that. I mean, sorry to just jump in, but I think you're absolutely right. And to be fair, Osborne began to engender some of that with the Northern Powerhouse, you know, and it was a compelling sort of vision. The trouble is, I was in China recently, and I discovered that the Chinese government are still talking about it more than the UK government, and they clearly got it, but I just wish our own government would talk about it as much again. But it was about a vibrant north, wasn't it? And we mustn't make this sound like gritty and begging bowl and all of that. This place has got so much potential. You know, you couldn't find more capable, willing, resilient people anywhere on the planet, in my view. And yet that potential is held back at the moment. So it shouldn't be a kind of message of doom and woe is us. I think today is a celebration, as I said at the beginning, because this is about us being everything that we've got the potential to be.
I'm actually a southerner.
Quality of life is a really important thing, and Kate touched on this as well. So this is not a north versus south thing, but there is such an amazing opportunity outside of our great cities here, with our rural areas, our coast. You know, so you know, within 20 minutes of being here, you can be out in an amazing countryside in the Peak District and have all of that. And I think, as Kate said, and I said, you need to build that brand and say, yeah, okay, we have got cheaper housing, but the cultural offer, the working offer, the quality of life, the rounded offer. But at the moment, now we come back to it, you are essentially, particularly if you're a young person, set within a sort of 3 or 4 mile radius of your home, and you need to see those opportunities around there. And the perception is, go down to London, you can have all of this. Well, you can actually have all this in the north. In fact, you can have more in the north. We just can't get it. As Andy said, it's difficult, it's not expensive, and that is a big thing.
I mean, everything we know about successful places tells us that quality of life underpins why people want to stay there and remain there. And
I wouldn't go back down south again at all.
Can I just come in on that brand piece again, though? Because we've got to be like smart about it. Because if you go to, has anybody been to MIPIM? It's like a property thing. It's like a big property thing. They drink more champagne at MIPIM than they do at the film festival in Cannes. It's really okay. Everybody needs to get at least once. Okay, so there's like property stands, and it's property. Places. You know, cities promoting themselves. That's what it is, promoting themselves to investors and developers. And the reality is, if you go to any of the stands, they'll go, we have an amazing quality of life. 2 minutes from your doorstep, you've got the amazing house, you've got really skilled people, da-da-da-da-da. Every bugger has got exactly the same piece. So one of the things that we need to do is work out, one, what is distinctive? What have we genuinely got that's authentic and distinctive and is different? And then talk about it and brand it in a very smart way. It's not going to come for free with a badge and a bloody carrier bag. Do you know what I mean?
I think
it needs to be done properly.
I think that's right. But I think we also got to build that sense of identity and belonging to the North from the bottom up too. You know, helping people to actually realise what's actually in front of their eyes and what we have to offer here, and helping them, particularly those places that feel completely left out of the debate at the minute, helping them to reconnect with other parts of the North.
There's also, going back to people coming up here to university from, say, the South or wherever, is actually getting them to stay here, to keep retaining
And
that talent.
That is starting to happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
So I think part of the answer to your question is broader devolution. So I don't want to be the only city region in the north of England with the level of devolution that we've got. We actually want more, and we're making a case for that through our prosperity review. So they came out and said exactly as Kate was saying, much more control over the whole of the education and skills system, and that was one of their recommendations. Also, more devolution of DWP, social security. And that, I think, is part of the answer, because to answer your question, how do you attract young people to stay? I mean, I'll give you a very small example. Through our devolved power over the NHS, we've recently come up with a guarantee for nursing graduates in Greater Manchester. So if anyone qualifies in a nursing degree from one of our 4 universities, we guarantee them now a job in the Greater Manchester NHS. So it's kind of, the offer is different all of a sudden. It's not come and study here, it's come and build a life here in our NHS. And I think that is a different, it's a different way of sort of promoting the North. And I think you can then sort of commit to people's values, can't you? Your values are our values. You know, this is a place that looks after people. That I think you can start to build the story that Kate describes through that.
You're spot on, because, so if you think about the Eddie Stobart brand just for a moment, is that people think that Eddie Stobart drivers still wear ties because they were the gentlemen of the road. They haven't worn ties for years, but the values in there of like, he's the gentleman and it's always a clean truck and everything, was so deep that our drivers could almost do anything and people don't see it. They see what the values are of that. So you're spot on. If we work out what are those distinctive, I love that nursing thing, those distinctive values, that's another, that also means that you're coming bottom up inevitably. Then the brand will emerge from those values, the distillation of those values.
Definitely.
Do you think that we could have had a strategic transport plan 10, 15 years ago?
I think we needed the devolution to come first, to be able to give us the confidence and the ability to work together across the North in order to really kind of empower us to take matters into our own hands. So I think, perhaps, but I think we needed that devolution to give us that extra push. And actually, devolution is still, as Andy said, is still unfinished. 50% of the population in the North still aren't covered by any kind of devolution arrangements. So we do need that process to continue. We're really only at the start of the process.
But also, the last 10, 15 years, the North has changed quite drastically, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has,
No, I think Sarah's right. I mean, as you know, I was in Parliament for 16 years, and I look back on it and I blame myself alongside my colleagues. We didn't organise properly as Northern MPs. You're so stuck in Parliament in the tribal lines. That's the way the place works. The whip system, the 2 rows of benches, the point scoring. That's the way the place works. That's the currency of the place. When in fact, if we'd have thought differently about mobilising the power of the North when it comes to some of these big votes on budgets, and I think I look back on it and think we weren't trained to think in that way. But actually, if we had have operated in that way, we would have probably used more leverage for the North of England. And, that is one of my big feelings, kind of looking back at Parliament, having been there for such a long time. It is a London-centric place. It does think inside the M25 first. It does. And so, how do you break that? It means Northern MPs thinking differently. And I kind of feel this is kind of one of the things that's maybe a positive thing that falls out of this crisis that we're in at the moment. I think people are beginning to think differently about how you should use your voice. Myself and Steve had the experience of working on Hillsborough, and that really brought home to us how if the North can be ignored by people down there, it will be. And you have to think very differently then about how you use political power. And actually, the great strength today, I think, as everyone has said, is the power comes with the united front. All political parties, politics and business in the same room like we are today. People campaigning on the environment, everyone in the same room. That's where the power comes from. And I kind of feel now we've got to give this plan to our northern MPs and say, look, you make sure you kind of use your leverage. Don't give your vote away. You know, you make the government put this to the top of the list. And I hope that they will.
It's interesting you picked 15 years ago, because 15 years ago this year, we were talking about devolved assemblies, and there was a referendum in the northeast. Now that was almost though this top-down. I think so. I was saying this has to be bottom-up. That was almost a top-down sort of like, you know, this is what you're going to have. This is how the regional assembly is going to work. And people are going, well, I just don't want that. I want this. And I think what we've done now with this bottom-up approach, which started with Northern Way and has carried on, as we've worked out, this is not devolution for devolution's sake. This is devolution and singularity of voice for a purpose that has to talk to everybody, to young and old, say town and country, urban and rural, and say this is what it means for you. And I think that devolution has helped, but I also think as well the politics has changed, where we have local leaders and business leaders who've challenged me all the way, as this gentleman knows, every single step of the way, to make sure this plan can be as inclusive and complete as it can be.
But let's not underestimate the scale of the job from here. Just to emphasise a point I was making when I spoke at the beginning. As things stand, the Treasury won't fund this plan because all of the schemes won't pass what's called its BCR because of this economic test that they apply to transport investment. So that's the problem we've got. And this is the danger about leaving Europe. Europe always applied a social case for investment. So Liverpool's had lots of funding, Metrolink got European funding, because it was not done on that economic test, it was done on a social need test. And the danger is if you leave Europe and don't address that and carry on funding on the economic test, then we will be compounding the problem. And it's very, very important, therefore, that this is about building a political case for the investment, because if we leave it to the way things are normally done, we won't get it.
So my question now then is you know, how are we going to ensure that the plan is sustainable, or if it actually, you know, to make it actually happen?
The relationship with business will be really, really important. Right. If I look at the transport infrastructure that we've invested in, at London South End, for example, we built the station. We've done all of that without any subsidy at all. It was just about making sure that there was a sensible and smart business case. Carlisle Lake District Airport has been more challenging because of its demographic and for all sorts of reasons. But I think for politicians to maintain healthy dialogue with the private sector to make sure that they're really encouraging investment. And that's another important point about this plan, because it is a strategic plan. Again, I think that provides confidence itself to investors, actually, that it's the fact that it's there. But that relationship with the private sector, I think, needs to be deepened, so that we're working creatively together, not just like, do you want a grant? No, I'll do. You know what I mean? Not that kind of sort of very binary conversation, which are a bit useless. It needs to be an intelligent conversation with the private sector, I think.
I think the other way in which it will be sustainable is to we've done the job now of bringing the politicians together, of bringing sort of stakeholders together. How do we now start to make this a plan for people living in the north, and how do we strengthen the opportunities for people to contribute and to comment and to actually be part of the plan in the longer term? Because without that kind of accountability and that buy-in from the wider kind of northern community, then that's going to be much more challenging going forward, because it's not only bottom up in terms of stakeholders like us that are interested in it, but bottom up in terms of the people who live in the north as well.
So we need to challenge the norms of how, as Andy said, the appraise scheme. So picking up one of Andy's examples, I think is a really good one about the devolution of rail stations. Now, Treasury looking at that on a purely economic business case capability. Now, as Andy said, it cannot be right in the 21st century that 50% of Greater Manchester, probably a wider range of the North's rail stations, are not DDA compliant. Okay. Go one step further, though, is that I suspect for 4 or 5 months of the year, those rail stations are no-go areas for young people and particularly young women. So you are excluding whole swathes of society from an ability to use public transport and get on in life. Now, somehow, we need to capture, if we did this, if Andy got hold of the rail stations and made them all DDA compliant and put proper lighting on there, what quantity of the workforce can you unleash? What does that mean in economic terms? And what does that mean in social value terms? And I think we're quite close to being able to do that, Naomi. But we have to break, as Andy said, the fact that Treasury will go back to this BCR. And it's not about business, it's about people, it's about opportunity. Because you know, Andy wants to do this, and something like that will be transformational to the network. Cost, again, is another, the cost of value is another thing.
Well, it's exactly right, isn't it?
Yeah.
The answer to the Treasury is you can't grow your economy without that initial investment in quality infrastructure that London had years ago, actually, before there was any such thing as a BCR. So that's the argument to make back to them. I think, but Kate's absolutely right as well, that building of the kind of partnership, deepening the partnership between different parts of the North, the different political parties, and crucially with business. That, I think, is what makes this different. It's why this is a great day, let's be honest about it. The North's voice is more powerful today than it's ever been in this country. Certainly in my lifetime. I don't know whether that's true of everybody else in the room. I feel that that is the case. You know, we are stronger today than we've ever been, but it's about using that leverage now, that kind of place in the debate we've managed to get for ourselves to turn it into something real. And where this goes from here, as far as I'm concerned, is to the second convention of the North, which we're hoping to hold later this year, June or July, where we kind of keep these moments where the North comes together to keep amplifying the message, deepening the partnership. I'm very optimistic about all of that.
Do you think it's just big business that's had a voice in this, or of SMEs as well? Can they find their voice to sort of have an impact on this as well?
It's tricky talking to SMEs, isn't it? Because there's loads of them. So
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Because they're small. But I think they are an important voice, obviously. One of the ways I think you can do that effectively is by recognising that some of the larger businesses have SMEs in their supply chain, and actually dealing with it through a supply chain way is probably the soundest.
I'm looking directly at Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce as you asked me that question, who's sitting over there. So they are definitely represented, I think, well by our chamber.
Manchester here as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I should be fair to all sides of our business community.
I think part of it, Naomi, is in the work we've done on the plan, again, so back to Kate, we've talked to business.
Yeah.
So when you talk to Siemens on the Humber Estuary, and they say, you know, we have got these massive plans for investment in wind turbines. We need, you know, small businesses to be part of that supply chain, but an hour's travel from the Humber Estuary doesn't really get you out of the Humber a lot of the time, sort of thing, you know. So, you know, we've got Boeing on the doorstep here and a flourishing advanced manufacturing cluster of SMEs in East Lancashire. So, you know, why can't somebody from Burnley or Blackburn aspire to work of the supply chain for Boeing or McLaren? I mean, it's difficult for them to get to Manchester, let alone get across the Pennines, you know. So we have to overcome that, and by listening to businesses, it's the SMEs that will then feed this supply chain. That's where the apprenticeships come from. And that's where you want to say to somebody, your future is in the north of England. Look what we can do for you.
So what's next? What's next for the plan?
I'm going to go home and sleep, I think.
I felt for him at times at Transport for the North meetings, because
You never said that.
He kept coming thinking, this is going to be the day when we... And hang on. And I did it to you last week, didn't I?
You did, yeah. Page 96, Andy. Yes,
Page 96. Tram train for Manchester. Well, anyway, it's in the
It is.
You've done a brilliant job. I mean, TfN needs to be supported by everybody, in my view. You know, this is a really important part of building this pan-northern infrastructure. I'd like to praise IPPR North as well. I think they've been a really crucial voice in building this kind of transport argument. I think they've really played an important part. But you know, they have done a fantastic job with it. And I think what's next? The minute this Brexit debate is over, wherever the technical stuff that's being kind of endlessly debated, it seems to me that there has to be a moment of refocusing on the regions. Has to be. And here's a plan that they could pick up straight away. I just think but we can't guarantee that will happen. And I think we've got to keep building the argument, the pressure amongst us. And I'm really, really hopeful that we will get there.
Okay, can we open up to the audience now for some questions? Oh, there's one over there. Is it there? Yeah, too. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, I tried, is the honest answer. It's not just the Treasury rules, by the way, that I think are wrong on that BCR. It's also the Barnett formula. That is also unfair to Northern England, which is, people wouldn't admit at the times, and there was all these debates looming about Scottish independence, but that is also the case. But the moment I really understood it properly was when Alistair Darling, as Chancellor, asked me to put together the funding package for Crossrail. It's a difficult thing to admit in this company today, isn't it? But I did. But I asked the Treasury for a list of regional projects that I could fund at the same time as Crossrail. And it came back with only one thing on it, a feasibility study for Birmingham New Street. That literally was the only thing, spending review 2007. And I asked why, and I finally got that explanation as to why. Now, I moved on shortly after, but I'm quite clear, though, that all governments have failed the North. You know, I'm not making any political points here at all. And it's because of that inbuilt bias to London and the South East, which no government of any colour, including the one of which I was a member, has successfully broken.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
Hello? Oh, there, that's better. Hi, I'm Councillor Dan Sutherland. I represent Calderdale Council, which is a borough with a number of small towns, with Halifax being the principal one. I think, Andy, you've outlined a vision that is really exciting, which is around buses, active travel, cycling, and tackling those real issues which are real for people in the day-to-day. Sadly, what I see in the plan and what I see on the pictures are around roads, and for Calderdale particularly, it's high-speed rail which will cut through my area but not stop in my area. We talk about the funding imbalance. How do we make sure that the argument for achieving the carbon neutrality that you outline, or achieving the changes to buses, balance out in that funding battle against roads and high-speed rail?
That's a really good question. And actually, I mean, Jonathan will remember this. Dan Jarvis raised this at our TfN meeting on Thursday. At the end, under any other business, he said, can we talk about cycling and walking at one of these meetings? You know, it always seems to be sort of last or not even on the agenda. And I think that's really important. You know, we should be talking about cycling and walking first on the agenda, not last on the agenda, because actually that delivers more returns in terms of physical and mental well-being, cleaning up the environment. So, you know, why is that always the last on the list in any transport meeting? So you're right, norms have to be challenged here. And I've said to colleagues in Greater Manchester when we've done our spatial framework, stop building for the road, which is what we're still doing, by the way, letting developers pick sites that are basically sites that are linked to road transport. When are we going to start building connected to public transport, building in our town centres? And you're right, there's a much bigger debate, but to be fair to Jonathan and the team, there's a real kind of breadth of projects in this plan, and many of them are projects of the kind that you're calling for.
I think when you go back, 12 months ago when the draft plan was there was no mention of cycling and walking whatsoever. And we were on, I said, well, that's not TfN's role. TfN is a strategic transport body. That's what we were given to do. But as Andy kind of alluded to, very often the first decision to make a journey by public transport is that first bit of the journey. Is it easy to walk? Is it easy to cycle? Is it easy to get to my bus stop? So if we're serious about decarbonisation, if we're serious about mode shift, even to some of the rail projects we've got, you have to invest in cycling and walking. And interestingly, for those sort of nerds amongst us, last year the National Infrastructure Commission said you need a 4-fold increase in local urban transport at the same time as the type of things we're talking about today in strategic transport. And we back that in the plan, and we say that is essential, because without the whole journey, you won't get that mode shift that we all aspire to.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. This gentleman here and the lady over there in the red.
Anthony Ray from the Environmental Transport Organisation. Now, we think about this question, how the strategic transport plan would transform the whole of the North economy in a sustainable way. From the perspective of carbon, it's really great to hear that just mentioned in the last few minutes. And congratulations to TfN, because on page 80 and 81 of this plan is a best-of-class decarbonisation pathway. So it's really excellent. But so far, most of today, we've been hearing about more investment, more journeys, more jobs and so forth, which is of course right, but not so much about less carbon. And of course, as Andy knows, and congratulations, Andy, for the work that you've been doing, we have to combine the more with the less. it isn't a question of choosing between them. So the question is, when this carbon pathway is available in 2020, and you have to make some really important choices, isn't that going to be the real test for this plan?
Yeah. Shall I answer that? I mean, Mr. Ray deserves credit, actually, because he was pressing Transport for the North with a number of colleagues that it wasn't strong enough on the environment, it's fair to say, isn't it? And that was picked up by some of us, and the plan is different because of that. So it's not a kind of top-down exercise like you might feel the government has done. TfN is, I think, open to that wider discussion and developing with people, so you did a great job. What less? Well, less of the most polluting vehicles, definitely. So we're about to introduce a clean air zone, a Category C clean air zone in Greater Manchester, or we are minded to introduce one, which will mean less polluting vehicles. But actually, to be honest with you, less car journeys. That's the logic of this plan if it was implemented properly. And that's what we need. The roads across the north, rural as well as cities, are at saturation point, I think. You know, we can't take any more traffic. And one of the biggest arguments for HS2, I think, is the effect it would have on the M6, which is unsustainably congested between Birmingham and Manchester. You know, at the moment, you can't get freight onto the West Coast Main Line. No. If you're going from Manchester for a business meeting in Birmingham, you'll likely drive because the trains aren't good enough. That less car journeys, I think, is the less thing that's got to come out of this. And we've all got to get into that behaviour change argument.
And our last question.
So my name is Amanda. I actually am a youth counsellor for North Links Youth Council, wanting to sort of come as a young person's representative. So you talk about the area of accessibility for young people and the limitations to transport for, say, for example, on buses, on trains, something like that. The accessibility for young people, because I also work with people with autism, and it kills me because in my local area, there's no accessibility on transport, mainly for people with these types of disabilities and these young people that would like to have more independence. They'll have to travel further for jobs. The job opportunities are slim to none. So what, in your opinion, do you think that as a young person, I can take back to my MP about how I can deal with transport and who I can contact as well?
Doesn't that touch on the stuff that Andy was saying in part about cost? There's lots of issues around accessibility. You're spot on about, do you feel safe actually? Is there a bus in your village in the first place? But a lot of this is down to cost. You know, we need to get something sorted whereby there are caps / limitations / policies which manage those costs to enable young people to get on it in the first place.
I think there's also something about getting some of those stories from young people up to the decision-making community, particularly in rural areas where we know rural bus subsidy has been completely wiped out. Yeah. So that's really limiting the chances of young people to be able to access the services and jobs that they need. So I think trying to get some of those messages and stories up to the decision makers and making the case for the future, and particularly around the social need, is really important.
Can you also just tell your youth council as well that it's really important that you lot stay really gobby as part of this debate? Yeah? Don't just go back and go, oh, they said it. Yeah, they said it'll all be all right, so we can shut up now, because it's incredibly important that the young people's voice continues to be heard. Yeah. So stay gobby, yeah?
Honestly, I think it's brilliant that you're the last question, because you've definitely made your mark in this debate, and then no doubt about that. But in many ways, we need to mobilise young people behind this plan, because it is actually, most of us might not see all of these schemes in this. I asked at TfN last week for everybody to reveal what age they would be when Northern Powerhouse Rail got built, and it was quickly descended into quite a depressing conversation. But it's going to be your generation. This is actually about transport for your generation. And so mobilising the voice of young people, and it's great that you're here, by the way, behind this is really important. I recognise everything that you're saying, and I get challenged by my youth combined authority, to the point where we're going to introduce a free bus pass for 16 to 18-year-olds in Greater Manchester, just because we, to put our money where our mouth is and say, look, you've got too many barriers in front of you. Public transport's far too expensive, and you therefore can't access those study or work opportunities. But I completely feel that this is about young people. This debate should be about the young people of the North. And the more that TfN can kind of get your voices into this debate, the stronger our plan will be.
Yeah.
No, sure.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to continue this conversation at lunchtime, but thank you very much to our panel, Jonathan, Sarah, Kate and Andy. I just also like to draw your attention to the lunchtime Q&A, which is in the drawing room from 1 till 1:30, with Councillor Ian Giles, who's Transport for the North Vice Chair, and his guests Lucy Hudson and Tim Foster. Thank you.